When I was 12 years old, my father pulled me aside in our long, echoing hallway, the kind with hardwood floors that turned footsteps into thunder. He had just returned from one of his business trips, his tailored navy suit still crisp, his tie knotted with militant precision. I remember the way he looked at me that day, not like a father looking at his son, but like a man assessing a defective product. He said, "The way you walk embarrasses me." I stood there frozen, not sure what he meant. I looked down at my feet, confused. Was I limping? Slouching? I had just walked across the foyer to greet him. Apparently, I'd done it wrong. "Straighten your back," he snapped. "Don't sway your hips. And stop flicking your hands around when you talk. It looks weak." That was the word that came up a lot in our house. Weak. And it was always tied to how I expressed myself, not how I performed. Because by all accounts, I was a good kid. I got straight A's. I said yes, sir, and no, sir. I made my bed each morning with military corners and memorized my weekly vocabulary lists like they were sacred texts. But none of that mattered if my wrists were too loose, or if I smiled too much, or, God forbid, if I crossed my legs the wrong way at the dinner table. I remember trying to mimic him. I'd stand in front of my mirror practicing how to walk with my shoulders stiff, chest puffed. I lowered my voice when I spoke. I watched sports I didn't care about and stopped humming while doing chores because once he told me, "Boys don't hum. That's something girls do." It was a silent war I waged against myself, trying to erase parts of me that he'd never learned to love. He wasn't the type to scream or throw things. He didn't need to. My father had this particular kind of cold that could freeze you from the inside out. A glance from him could shrink your entire existence. He didn't believe in hugs or praise. He believed in molding, in building sons like corporations. Structured, silent, and useful. I kept telling myself that maybe if I was perfect enough, if I just hid the parts of me that made him uncomfortable, I could earn his approval. That maybe I could become someone he didn't flinch at. But puberty came, and so did the whispers. At school, the other boys started picking up on it too. The slight lilt in my voice, the way I crossed my arms, the softness in my face. "Are you gay or something?" They'd jeer in the locker room, laughing while I kept my eyes down. I never answered. I didn't even know the answer yet. But I knew I couldn't go home and talk about it. When I did mention being teased at school, hoping for some kind of support, he cut me off. "That's because you act like a girl," he said, not even looking up from his newspaper. "Toughen up, or they'll eat you alive." In high school, it got worse. I tried dating girls. It felt like acting out a role in a play. Lines I memorized, gestures I copied. I took a girl to prom just to show him I could. She wore a blue dress that matched my tie, and we smiled for the photo. I showed it to my dad the next day, hoping, praying. He'd say something like, "You look good, son." He didn't even look at the picture. He just muttered, "Took you long enough." There was never a moment, not once, where he said he was proud of me. I'd come home with top scores, leadership awards, a scholarship acceptance letter. He would nod and say, "That's expected." Nothing I did moved the needle, because I wasn't what he wanted. One night, I overheard him on the phone with his brother, my Uncle Paul. I was walking past his study when I heard him say, "He's not like the other boys. He's soft. He smiles too much. He just doesn't have it in him." That it hung in the air like a curse. I backed away from the door and sat in the hallway for a long time, the darkness swallowing me whole. That was the night something in me began to split. I stopped trying so hard. Not because I didn't want his approval anymore, but because I finally realized I'd never get it. I still remember the final straw. It was a Sunday morning, just before my high school graduation. We were in the living room. I was wearing a new suit, one I had picked myself. Slim cut, charcoal gray, with a subtle pinstripe. I had practiced my posture in it, had rehearsed my handshake. I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd notice. He stared at me for a long time, then said, "Fix your tie. You look like a damn runway model, not a man." And then under his breath, just loud enough for me to hear, "You'll never be a real man. Not in my house." I didn't respond. I just looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I let him see it. that I wasn't ashamed anymore. I didn't say a word, but I knew someday I'd show him exactly what kind of man I was. By the time I was 24, I had learned to wear armor. Not the kind you see in movies, no clanking metal or heroic speeches. Mine was subtle. Tailored suits, controlled expressions, perfectly prepared reports. I had graduated near the top of my class in business school, specialized in logistics optimization, and completed 2 internships at firms my professors called dream placements. But none of that mattered when I stepped through the mirrored doors of Whitaker Freight and Transport, the company my father built. He called it his legacy. I called it the glass house where every crack echoed. When I joined the company as an intern, which was the only position he'd allow me to hold even with a degree, I came in like a machine. I arrived early, stayed late, volunteered for tasks no one wanted. While other interns took long lunches and dodged Excel spreadsheets like landmines, I buried myself in the numbers. I streamlined a route network for one of our biggest clients, shaving off 18% in delivery time. My proposal saved the company over $900,000 that fiscal year. I heard the CFO mention it in a board meeting. Everyone applauded. Everyone except my father. After the meeting, I approached him cautiously. "Did you see the numbers? The Eastern Corridor projections?" I asked, hoping for just a sliver of acknowledgement. He barely looked up from his phone and said, "Stick to the spreadsheets, son. Let the real decision-makers handle strategy." Real decision-makers. That phrase stuck in my teeth like a shard of glass. At first, I told myself I just needed to prove myself more. Work harder. Be sharper. I got better at masking my emotions. I cut my hair shorter. Wore darker suits. Even practiced deeper vocal tone in front of the mirror. The old habits, pretending to be someone else, crept back in. Then came Kyle, my cousin. My father's sister's son. Tall, broad. A former college quarterback with a handshake like a vice grip and a LinkedIn bio full of charm and fluff. He joined the company 3 months after I did. And within a week, my father was introducing him to senior managers as the next generation of leadership. Kyle couldn't calculate margin if it were tattooed on his arm. He once asked me what an invoice aging report was in a meeting, but he knew how to slap backs and tell war stories over whiskey. And that was enough. One afternoon, we were in the executive conference room for a quarterly strategy session. I had spent 2 weeks preparing a market analysis presentation. I even rehearsed it 3 times, making sure every slide was perfect. I was supposed to present second, but before I could speak, my father cut in. "Actually, Kyle has something to share." Kyle stood, holding a napkin with a rough sketch of some warehouse flow idea he'd cooked up while bored at lunch. It made no sense, the metrics didn't even align. I sat there, frozen, while the others politely nodded. After the meeting, I approached my father. I thought I was on the schedule to present. He interrupted me without blinking. "Kyle needs more face time. He's got presence." "I delivered the report you asked for. The solid. The projections." He finally looked up at me. Not angry, just disappointed, as if I had asked to borrow the car keys like a child. He said it plainly, "You're soft. You're not CEO material." I stood there, every muscle in my body buzzing. My fists clenched so tightly my nails left crescents in my palm. "What does that mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "It means people don't follow the quiet kid with feelings. They follow the guy who makes noise. The guy who commands a room." I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. I wanted to say, "I command a spreadsheet that saved your precious company $1 million. But I knew it wouldn't matter. To him, leadership wasn't about insight or innovation. It was about swagger, volume, force, things I never gave him, things he never saw in me, even when I stood there practically begging to be noticed. I went home that night and didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster like they were tally marks for every time he cut me down. And I thought, what if he's right? What if no matter how smart I am, how efficient, how good, I'll never be enough for a world that still measures strength by the baritone of your voice and the width of your shoulders? But then I remembered something from childhood. That hallway, that voice. "The way you walk embarrasses me." And I realized this had never been about business. It was never about logistics, leadership, or spreadsheets. It was about shame. His shame. He couldn't separate who I was from how it reflected on him. And in that moment, something inside me didn't just break. It hardened. I didn't quit. Not yet. But I stopped trying to be seen. I became invisible on purpose. Because you don't challenge a king in public. You wait until the crown is loose. And then you take the throne without asking. I was 26 when I finally said it out loud. Not to friends, they already knew. Not to strangers, I'd done that in safe places carefully controlled. But to the one person I'd been avoiding it with my whole life. My father. It was a Wednesday. I remember that because he'd just returned from a quarterly board retreat in Aspen. And the smell of his cologne, sharp, expensive, overbearing, still clung to his suit jacket hanging by the door. I had spent the whole morning rehearsing in my head. I told myself it didn't matter anymore, that I didn't need his blessing, but I still needed to say it. I wanted the truth to live in the same room as his denial, even if only for a moment. He was pouring himself a scotch in the living room when I walked in. "I need to talk to you," I said. He didn't look up. "If it's about this month's projections, talk to Kyle. It's not about the company." He glanced at me. "Then I doubt it's important." I inhaled slowly. "I'm gay, Dad." The silence that followed wasn't loud. It was surgical. He didn't drop the glass. He didn't shout. He simply placed the tumbler down on the bar cart and turned toward me, the weight of 40 years of masculine pride bracing his shoulders. He studied me like I was a stranger in his home. "You want to be that kind of man?" he said at last. "Fine. But not with my name. Not with my company." It was so matter-of-fact, so transactional. "I built Whitaker Freight from nothing," he continued. "Brick by brick. Men follow strength. Men lead with steel, not softness. You want to cry and parade around in silk shirts, fine. But not under this roof. Not with my bloodline." "I'm still your son," I said. My voice cracked, but I didn't look away. He narrowed his eyes. "Not anymore." That was it. He gave me 24 hours to get out. No further discussion. No fake civility. "You can keep your diploma. That's yours. But you'll have no stake in this company. No inheritance. Nothing else with my name on it." The next morning, I packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases. A friend from business school, Marcus, let me crash on his couch downtown. His place smelled like old ramen and ambition. A second-floor walk-up with peeling paint and good intentions. That first night, I sat on the floor beside my bags and stared at the ceiling. It wasn't the loss of money or property that gutted me. It was the loss of the myth, the one I'd carried my whole life, that if I just worked hard enough, buried enough of myself, he'd see me, accept me, love me. But now there was nothing left to sacrifice. I'd already traded my laughter for silence, my softness for stone, and my identity for invisibility. And none of it was enough. I felt hollow, floating, like I had fallen through the floor of a house I spent my entire life building just to please a man who never even noticed the foundation. For weeks I floated. No job, no income. My savings bled out fast, rent, groceries, broken laptop charger, cheap suits for interviews that went nowhere. Every time I opened LinkedIn, I saw Kyle, posing in boardrooms, quoting articles he didn't understand, celebrating the company's success, a company I'd bled for. And then, out of nowhere, I got an email. Subject: Logistics Analyst Role, Danner Freight Solutions. It was from a small startup I'd interviewed with over a year ago. They had remembered me, said they liked my sharp mind and quiet intensity. I almost didn't reply, but something in me clicked. I wasn't going to keep chasing scraps from my father's table. I would build my own kitchen. So I joined Danner Freight, a company no one had heard of, with a cramped office and barely any funding, but with people who saw potential instead of posture. I started small, entry-level, back to basics, and for the first time in my life, I didn't pretend to be someone else. I spoke the way I wanted to, walked the way I walked, even wore the clothes that made me feel like myself. No one blinked. No one mocked me. In fact, they listened, asked questions. took notes. They let me lead meetings. They trusted me. At night, I still heard my father's words, like broken glass echoing through an empty hallway. Not with my name, not with my company. But now something was changing. The pain wasn't just pain anymore. It was fire, fuel. The shame he planted in me was evolving into something sharper, something cleaner. Not rage, not revenge. Resolve. I didn't need his name. I'd build something better, something stronger, something that didn't confuse cruelty for strength or control for love. One night, alone in the office after hours, I looked out the window, just past the industrial park, the skyline blinking in the distance. That's where my father's building stood. Cold, tall, fragile in its own way. I whispered more to myself than to him. One day you'll wish I wasn't a real man. I didn't wake up one morning a millionaire. There were no grand turning points, no sudden inheritances, no viral breakthroughs. Just early mornings, late nights, and a slow, steady climb. Like laying bricks while the world isn't watching. Danner Freight started with 7 people squeezed into a repurposed insurance office above a vape shop. The coffee machine rattled when you touched it, the server room doubled as a supply closet, and our entire marketing budget consisted of a whiteboard and a dream. But it was ours. My first year I did everything: inventory audits, route scheduling, customer calls, and even cleaning out a rat's nest behind the main server when IT refused to go near it. I didn't care. I wasn't above it. I had something to prove. Not to anyone else, not anymore. To myself. The company grew slowly, then steadily. I proposed a new routing algorithm I'd designed on my own time, a hybrid of AI forecasting and real-time driver feedback. It shaved down delays, saved money, and more importantly, made our drivers feel heard. That was the difference. I didn't just look at logistics like numbers on a screen. I looked at people. I introduced a transparent pay scale, instituted family leave for everyone, not just mothers. We hired LGBTQ plus drivers, veterans, former felons. People my father would have considered liabilities. I saw them as the backbone. Our first big break came when a mid-size eco-retail company dropped Whitaker Freight after one too many late deliveries and signed with us instead. I remember the day we got the contract. I stood in our tiny break room, holding the email in one hand and a chipped mug of instant coffee in the other. And I laughed. Not because I was happy, because I realized this was only the beginning. Over the next 3 years, I helped secure 12 major clients. We scaled from 20 employees to 200, then to 700. We opened 3 regional hubs, partnered with clean energy trucking providers, and even got a feature in Inc. magazine for Most Innovative Supply Chain Startups. I became the company's chief strategy officer by year 4. By year 5, I had equity worth more than every penny my father ever withheld from me. But I never called him, never emailed, never sent a Christmas card, not even a signed press release when Forbes listed me in their 40 under 40 issue. I didn't need him to know, but I also knew one day he would. In public, Whitaker Freight still looked unshakable marble lobby, a fleet of trucks, executives in $1,000 suits. But under the hood it was rusting. They were slow to adopt automation. They still used legacy software that lagged 2 versions behind. Their internal culture was toxic, built on fear and hierarchy. People began to leave quietly at first, then in waves. Some came to us. One of my proudest days was when our team onboarded a senior account manager who had worked under my father for 20 years. Over coffee, she leaned toward me and said, "You know, I used to think you were just some rich kid who didn't have it in him. But you built something he never could. A place people actually want to work in." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. Sometimes I'd glance at news alerts on Whitaker Freight, late shipments, a lawsuit involving a mishandled contract, an internal memo leak about executive bonuses while warehouse workers protested wages. My father never budged, never adapted. He believed companies were like armies: order, control, hierarchy. I believed they were like ecosystems. They needed diversity, transparency, and space to evolve. It was ironic, really. He taught me business was war. But he forgot that wars aren't always won by brute force. Sometimes they're won by those who refuse to fight until they've already won. By year 6, I had quietly become a multimillionaire. No yachts, no flashy cars, just a downtown apartment with exposed brick, plants I actually remembered to water, and a closet full of clothes I finally felt like myself in. I didn't wear masks anymore, not to blend in, not to appease. I wore confidence and peace. There were nights I'd walk out to the balcony and stare at the skyline, where my father's building still loomed. His office light, once a beacon of his late-night obsession, now blinked less often. The world was changing, and he wasn't. One of our junior analysts asked me in a meeting, "Do you ever miss Whitaker? Like, the chance to run it?" I smiled, because the truth is, I never wanted to run his empire. I wanted to build mine, and I did. I didn't need to knock on his door. He was already hearing the knocks from the other side. Competitors, investors, the media whispering about his son. The one he disowned. The one who couldn't lead. The one who turned out to be everything he said I wasn't. And still, I never reached out. I waited. I watched. And I let the silence between us grow long and wide and loud enough to make him wonder. Was he wrong? Because deep down I knew. The worst thing I could ever give him wasn't revenge. It was proof. By the time Whitaker Freight lost its second major contract, the media started circling. It wasn't public yet, not entirely, but within the logistics industry, word spread fast. They'd failed to renew with Harbor North Imports and then, 2 months later, were dropped by Crescent Labs due to delivery inconsistencies and systemic communication breakdown. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. But deep inside, I noticed. Both clients had come to us afterward. At Danner, we didn't celebrate with champagne. We celebrated by onboarding efficiently and proving we could do better, because we knew they were watching. And when I say they, I mean him. Whitaker Freight was hemorrhaging reputation. For a company built on hard discipline, it was irony at its sharpest, undone not by softness but by rigidity. Their board meetings grew more heated. Their shareholders grew anxious. And that's when the whispers started. They're looking for outside capital. That's all I needed to hear. Months earlier, I had worked with a discreet corporate lawyer to establish a holding entity. Blue Heron Investments, built offshore, filtered through 2 additional layers of shell corporations. On paper, it was a quiet firm seeking undervalued logistics assets. In truth, it was mine. I didn't want revenge. I wanted precision. So I waited patiently until Whitaker's valuation dipped just enough. And then Blue Heron made its move. A discreet acquisition offer for 51% control, just enough to stabilize the company and restructure leadership. The bid was generous. Too generous, maybe, but that was part of the strategy. I wanted them to take it. They did. The offer was accepted on a Friday. Signed by the interim finance chair. By Monday, the ink was dry. And by Tuesday morning, I was in the building. I wore a navy suit, the same color my father used to wear when he came home from those business trips I wasn't allowed to interrupt. My shoes were polished, my hair trimmed, my posture effortless. No more pretending. I stepped off the elevator and walked down the hallway where I used to trail behind him as a teenager, carrying binders I wasn't allowed to open. Now I held nothing. I didn't need props. The receptionist gave me a confused smile. "Can I help you, sir?" "Yes," I said, returning the smile. "I have a meeting in conference room A." Inside, the board was already gathered. 12 men and women, half of whom I recognized, half of whom I'd only seen in industry articles. They murmured among themselves until I stepped in and the room quieted. My father was seated at the head of the table. He looked older, more tired than I remembered. Gray at the temples, still proud in posture but thinner. He turned when the door opened, expecting another lawyer, maybe a consultant. Then he saw me. For a full 5 seconds, no one spoke. You could have heard a pin drop on carpet. "Good morning," I said, placing the shareholder brief on the table. "I'm the new majority stakeholder." His face didn't change right away. I watched it shift. Confusion, disbelief, then dawning horror. "No," he muttered, standing. "This isn't possible. This isn't legal." "It's very legal," I said calmly. Blue Heron is my holding company. Fully registered. Verified. The board has reviewed everything. The offer was accepted. The papers were signed 3 days ago. You tricked us. I gave you an opportunity, I said, keeping my voice even. You took it. The company needed help. I provided it. You're not qualified to. To what? I asked. To run the company I saved? The company that's been operating on outdated systems and ego for the last decade. A few board members shifted in their seats, but no one interrupted. You can't do this, he said louder this time. I built this from the ground up. I know, I said. I watched. For years. I respected what you built, Dad. Even when you didn't respect me. That landed like a stone dropped in a well. I let the silence stretch. You said I wasn't a real man, I continued. You said I'd never lead. Never earn the name. I opened the folder, flipped it toward him, the executive summary, the controlling interest breakdown, my signature. Well, here we are. His mouth opened, then closed. He had nothing. I looked around the table. Effective immediately, I'll be restructuring operations. Not replacing everyone, but auditing leadership. Not based on loyalty, based on merit, based on adaptability. This company will evolve or it will dissolve. Your choice. No one objected. Not even him. I didn't humiliate him. I didn't remove him. I offered him an option, a graceful exit or a ceremonial title. He chose the latter. I left the room before he could speak again. Not out of spite. Out of peace. I had nothing left to prove. Because in that moment he saw me. Not the version he tried to fix, silence, or disown. But the man I had become, without him, because of him, in spite of him. And for once, he couldn't say a word. The next morning, I arrived at Whitaker Freight 10 minutes before the executive meeting. The elevator ride up to the top floor was quiet, slow. I watched the floor numbers light up one by one, like a countdown to a moment I'd prepared my whole life for. When I stepped into the boardroom again, my father was already there. Standing this time, not seated, hands gripping the edge of the table like he needed something to hold him upright. His face was red. Not with embarrassment, with rage. You planned this, he said before I could sit. You plotted like a snake. You came in through the back door instead of being man enough to face me head on. I didn't flinch. I removed my coat, placed my folder on the table, and took the empty seat at the head, his seat. The air shifted when I did. Everyone felt it. But I stayed composed. This isn't betrayal, I said softly. This is evolution. Don't give me your buzzwords, he snapped. You stole this company. No, I said, meeting his eyes. You gave it away the moment you stopped listening to the people inside it. He scoffed and paced behind his chair. You really think this board's going to follow you? Some soft-spoken, spineless. I'm not here to match your volume, Dad. I kept my voice level. That's not leadership. That's ego. A few board members lowered their eyes. Others shifted uncomfortably. The silence between us grew thick, but I didn't let it choke me. Not this time. You built something impressive, I continued. I'll never deny that. But somewhere along the way you confused fear for respect. You led with iron, not vision. You controlled instead of empowered. And when the world changed, you didn't. He laughed bitterly. The world's gone soft. And you're the poster child. I leaned forward. No, I said. I'm what happens when strength finally learns to speak without shouting. I'm what happens when you stop hiding behind performance and start building with purpose. He went silent. I paused, then added, You never saw me. Not really. Not the late nights. Not the ideas. Not the numbers I delivered while you were too busy grooming Kyle to carry your name. You thought I was weak because I didn't bark like you. I looked around the room, slow and steady. Let me be clear. This company needs leadership that sees people, not just power. That listens. That adapts. That leads without destroying. The CFO, Mrs. Granger, spoke up then. We've reviewed the documentation. The transition is legal and binding. My father turned sharply to her. And you're okay with this? She didn't blink. I'm okay with the company surviving. He looked around the room, searching for loyalty. But the loyalty he once commanded had dried up. What he found were professionals ready for progress. I returned my gaze to him and said quietly, "You can stay, in an advisory role. You'll have a title, a legacy position. No day-to-day authority, no veto power. Just a seat at the table. A symbolic one." His jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists. "You want me to sit quietly while you... I want you to watch what happens when dignity enters a room before dominance," I said. "I want you to see what the company could have been, if you'd just listened." His face twisted. For a moment I thought he might lunge, might shout, might lose control. But then, something in him broke. Not loudly, just deflated. His shoulders sank. His fists opened. His mouth stayed shut. There it was, the realization. Not just that I'd taken his throne, but that I'd done it without needing his tactics.
No yelling. No manipulation.
No force. Just results. "I'll expect your formal acceptance of the advisory role by end of week," I added. "You're welcome to retain your office. We'll be remodeling the executive wing next quarter." He sat down, not in protest, but in something closer to defeat. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel spite. I felt calm, because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about returning the weight, all the weight he'd placed on me growing up. The shame, the judgment, the silence. I had carried it long enough. Now it was his, and it was heavy. As the meeting ended, people filed out quietly.
No fanfare. No congratulations.
Just a new rhythm settling into the building like fresh paint. I gathered my things slowly. My father remained in his chair, staring at the window. Before I left, I stopped beside him. He didn't look at me. "I'm not here to erase you," I said. "But I won't spend another day trying to impress you either." Still no response. I nodded once, more for myself than for him, and walked out. The door closed softly behind me. That sound was everything. A beginning and an end. It's strange, walking through a building that once rejected you, only to find your name etched into the walls. Whitaker Freight was no longer called that. After 6 months of restructuring, we rebranded. A new name, a new face, a new future. The logo now read Whitaker and Company Redefined. Underneath the main entry plaque, in clean silver lettering, sat a new dedication. In honor of innovation, inclusion, and integrity. Below that, my name. No title, just the truth. I walk the halls differently now. Not with fear, not with performance, just presence. I nod to people I once passed invisibly, janitors, drivers, data entry clerks. They all know me, not as the boss, not as Whitaker's son, but as someone who listens. I kept my father's office as it was, not to preserve it, but to remind myself what silence built, and what silence nearly destroyed. He still comes in twice a week. Quiet now. He takes meetings no one schedules and sits in on sessions where his opinion is no longer law. He's a figurehead, by choice. A ghost in the house he thought he owned. We don't talk much. Sometimes we nod in passing. That's enough. After the transition, we launched new initiatives, the kind my father once scoffed at. A diversity and belonging committee, led by employees at every level. A mental health stipend for staff. An LGBTQ plus business leadership scholarship in my mother's maiden name. The only person in my family who ever looked at me like I was whole. And we changed the dress code. Not to be woke, not to be trendy, but because people work better when they can breathe, when they're allowed to show up as themselves. I remember the first time one of our interns, a quiet, nervous kid named Tyler, thanked me during lunch. "I never thought I'd intern somewhere where I didn't have to hide," he said. I told him the truth. I used to hide for years in this same building. No one saw me. And he replied, "They see you now." I thought about that for a long time, because he was right, but not in the way he meant. They didn't see me now because I was in charge. They saw me because I stopped trying to be someone else. That was the real shift. Some nights I still work late, not out of necessity, but because there's a kind of peace that settles over a place when the lights dim and the noise fades. I walk the floors sometimes, just to feel it, the heartbeat of a company that isn't built on fear anymore. I passed the conference room last week and saw a young woman leading a team meeting. Sleeves rolled up, laughter in the air, whiteboards full of real ideas. She didn't pause when I walked by, didn't stiffen. She just kept leading. That, to me, is what legacy looks like. Not a portrait on a wall, but people thriving in rooms they used to fear. Once in a while, I'll still get invitations, interviews, profiles, awards. People want to know how I did it, how I rose, how I reclaimed the company my own father once swore I wasn't worthy of. And my answer is always the same. I stopped trying to be the man he wanted and became the man I needed. I used to believe masculinity had to be proven through posture, through silence, through grit-your-teeth ambition. But real men, the kind I admire now, they don't prove anything. They create, they support, they listen, they lead with integrity. A few weeks ago, I found an old family photo buried in one of the storage drawers of the old office. It was taken at a company picnic when I was 14. My father stood in the center, arms crossed. My mother beside him, trying to smile. And there I was, off to the edge, barely in the frame, face turned slightly as if even then I knew I didn't belong. I looked at that boy and wanted to reach through time. Tell him that one day, not only would he walk into this building without shame, he'd own it, change it, rewrite it. I keep that photo in a frame now, not out of nostalgia, out of remembrance, because that boy deserved more. And now, every decision I make, every policy I sign, every person I lift, it's for him. For the kid who walked like he wasn't allowed to, spoke like he didn't belong, smiled like it might betray him. I smile now without apology. And when I walk through these halls, I walk freely. I sat on the balcony last night, the city buzzing below me, lights blinking like old memories. And I thought of my father, how he disowned me to protect his name, his image, his idea of what a man should be. But here's the thing about names. You can't protect them from the truth. They evolve, they expand, they outgrow you. And in the end, he disowned me to protect his legacy. But now his legacy has my name on it, and I didn't have to raise my voice to get it. If you've ever been told you weren't enough, not strong enough, not masculine enough, not worthy of love or leadership, I hope this story reminded you. You don't have to change who you are to rise. You just have to stop shrinking for those too small to see your worth. If the story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've ever built yourself back from rejection, tell us your story in the comments below. We read every word. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more true stories that speak louder than revenge ever could.